Hey, what's up, guys? It's next time. I've recently finished playing Lifeless Planet, a game developed by one person whose passion and commitment really shines in this title. David Board, the creator of Lifeless Planet, started this game in 2011. You can find a link to his blog in the official page in the description below. His vision was to create an action adventure game set in space, but what he ended up creating was a 3D puzzle platformer. And that's not just me talking. It's a popular user defined tag on Steam. This game has the potential to be a really good game, and in my opinion, Dave got the hardest things right, but along the way, he got the essentials wrong. In this video, I will walk through 3 key subjects that Lifeless Planet can improve upon that I feel could really elevate the game into the proper status it deserves. Before I start digging into the negatives, I do want to take a minute and talk about the game's positives because this game is definitely worth a playthrough. Despite the shortcomings I will be laying throughout this video, I personally don't find any of them game breaking. That being said, I do believe normies will find them as deal breakers, and that's the very reason why I want to bring them to light. The changes I will describe are not super game mechanic changes. These are things that can be fixed, but will cost time. And given that the Premier Edition has been released, there may be little reason to do so. This is your spoiler warning. I will be going through the entire game, as these issues span throughout the entire game. If you haven't played it, keep it in mind, because this game isn't perfect. The beginning of the game has you crash land onto a red planet, presumably Mars, with your crew gone, and your suit is running low on oxygen. This starting section is very well crafted. You get a clean, empty space to familiarize yourself with the movement controls, and after a little exploring, you'll find a blinking light on your spacecraft. And as you get close, a menu will pop up that logs all the information bits you'll be unlocking throughout the game. This tutorial area is pretty solid. It is missing the fact that clicking the mouse button is also a way to interact with the world, but that'll be addressed later in the first level of the game. One notable thing here is that there's no health bar, no oxygen meter, and no HUD. The screen is absolutely clear, letting the player know that this game is less interested in resource management and more about experiencing the planet with the astronaut. The game's levels are neatly divided into distinct chapters, each with a theme in scenery and platforming to solve. After the landing site, you enter the foothills chapter, and as the name suggests, you'll be doing a fair bit of walking. This section acts as an extension of the tutorial because it demonstrates the platforming that you'll be doing throughout the entire game. Here, you'll also be introduced to a rock that you can push by clicking on it. The game shows a little icon to let the player know that this is a thing. It's not the most elegant solution, but considering that this is still tutorial territory, it's passable. The platforming you'll be doing in this chapter highlights what you'll essentially be doing for the rest of the game, which is figuring out how to get from A to B. Despite the tutorial section being solid, this is where you start to get to grips with the first thing that seriously needs to be redefined in this game, and that's the controls. From a design point of view, the controls are a player's main way of interacting with the game's world. So if they don't feel responsive, then the mistakes a player might make won't feel fair, and they'll be blamed on the game, which, is fair. I saw a few YouTube videos mention that the controls are bad, and even one YouTube video outright stated that they did not complete the game because of them.
I consider myself a platforming veteran, and this game had me missing some platforms I should have hit. They were frequent enough to annoy me, but nothing too serious. I've also seen how normies play games, and I can honestly tell you that a normie will have a real hard time completing this game. The controls should empower the player. They shouldn't be a main obstacle to the game, and this is something that I feel will seriously hurt the game in the long term. If it's not fun to platform in your platforming game, then they're just not going to play it.
Now, let me take a step back and make an argument as to why the controls are left as clunky as they are. Now, please hear me out because I know I just deservedly badmouthed this game. Keep in mind that you are playing as an astronaut in a spacesuit. These suits are meant to keep you alive. And they're not for fancy acrobatic space tricks. Have you seen any of those videos of the moon landing? Those guys clearly struggle with getting around, and with the realistic approach to the game design that Lifeless Planet is going for, it kinda makes sense why the astronaut controls the way he does. What really sold me on this idea was when I saw the alien lady. She climbs all over the place, straight up disappears and reappears in areas. And like she's even dressed in athletic clothing. This to me was a clear sign that she is a native to this planet and she can nimbly get around with no problem, while the astronaut is foreign to it and can barely manage these jumps. I could sit here and rationalize these bad controls all I want, but at the end of the day, the controls are bad. And if Dave wants people to enjoy his game, then he needs to make the core platforming mechanic of the game enjoyable. Like, these things are really bad. The design decision bugged me so much that I decided to reach out to Dave for a comment. Dave didn't get back to me. Dear Dave, I wrote you but you ain't responded. I left my cell, my Twitter, and my email at the bottom. I sent the email in this autumn, you must not have got 'em. There probably was a problem with their service then or something. If you stick it out with these bad controls, you'll reach chapter 2, the town. The town! I know this is just the second level, but it's also a really good example that highlights the second biggest issue this game has besides the controls, and that's this game's level of detail. The town itself is just a collection of box houses, a tower, a small graveyard, and this bunker. There isn't like a town hall, a church, a playground, a community center, light posts, trash bins, a doghouse maybe, cars, clothesline, a park, a pool. The list goes on. The most crucial thing I didn't notice was the portal the Soviets supposedly used to get onto this planet in the first place. I know there's one at the end of the game, but am I really being asked to believe that these nerds walked this far from the portal to set up a town? I would have imagined they would have built the town super close to the gate so that like trips for supplies isn't this incredible odyssey. I argue that it would have created intrigue into asking what the monument is and foreshadow the story elements that will be explained later in the game. The event that really drove home for me that this place was missing detail is the small cutscene you witness in the tower. When you get close, you'll see a buddy astronaut bleeding on the ground, and in my first playthrough, I was convinced this nerd was hallucinating everything. Because when the buddy astronaut disappears, there's no trace of blood anywhere. You're telling Dave, you're telling me that an astronaut bleeding on the ground wouldn't leave like a trail of blood leading into this place or a pool of blood where he was laying down on the ground? You're telling me to believe that this astronaut disappears this cleanly? I was convinced the entire town was made up because that's the only way these box houses make sense because the details just don't add up. I was convinced that this was all happening inside this nerd's head throughout the rest of the next few chapters. Like in the research station, the dude is literally following glowing footprints for crying out loud. I also believed it in the chasm and in the power station. I was really enjoying not knowing what was real or not until I reached the wastelands, which is where I realized that everything up until now was real. And I felt the game take a dramatic shift in direction. This shift is noticeable because the astronaut stops hallucinating stuff. You don't see a bed anymore, and you know the footprints are real. The enemies that are introduced are also super real. I'm not a writer, so I don't know if it all makes sense in the grand scheme of things. But what I do know is that the game that was presented to me was lacking in detail, and that lack of detail led me down the wrong idea of what this game actually was until I hit this chapter. The lack of detail was feeding me the theme that everything was a hallucination. Then, when you realize that everything you've seen so far is real, it was like a gut punch. I was really enjoying the story so far. I was super into it. And this split that was driven by the lack of detail had me daydreaming what Lifeless Planet would have been if Dave had kept pulling at this hallucination thread with the story being told by an unreliable narrator. I mean, you hallucinate an entire hospital room. This hallucination theme isn't just something I made up, it's part of the story. You start with the guy complaining about having a concussion. You see random beds that disappear. You hear people's voices talk while you're walking forward, and you hallucinate an entire hospital room with a yell at the end and magic glowing footprints that you follow. Compound that with the lack of detail in the town and the jarring entrance to the research station. All this stuff makes sense when it's not real. Just take a look at this. Did they play this every time they came down here? That doesn't make sense. But because it is real, then you have to understand that the game lacks enough detail to clue the player on what is real and what isn't. This is evident in Wasteland because nothing questionable happens afterwards. Everything is normal and the story is told in a steady manner. And I personally enjoyed the story. It was compelling enough to keep me playing, but I really wish I could explore what Lifeless Planet could have been. I was really hit by this change in tone that I decided to reach out to Dave to confirm whether or not my suspicion on this shift was correct. To this, Dave was more than happy to also not respond. Dear Mr. I'm Too Good for That Thingtanium fan, this will be the last email I'll ever send your ass. It's been 2 weeks and still no word. I don't deserve it. I know you got my last 2 tweets. I got your twiddle handle perfect. The rest of the game plays like how you'd expect a 3D linear platformer with a realistic approach to gameplay would play. There's a few issues here and there. A more notable one is in full display in the Wasteland and in the Inferno chapter. These two levels deviate from the rest of the linear gameplay by attempting to make these levels' linear design a bit more knotted and twisted as a platform navigation challenge for the player. Unfortunately, this approach falls short because of this level's lack of detail. It's very easy for the player to disorient himself here because everything looks the same. So you'll end up not knowing which direction you're supposed to go and which direction you've actually been. In levels like these, it's important to add like a monument or a structure to help the player orient himself in the space of the level. And since these two chapters don't have a structure like that, it's easy to get lost. The entire collection of levels in the game are varied enough to keep the gameplay feeling fresh. But these two levels in particular that lean heavily on the navigational puzzle nature is another example of this game's lack of detail. A monument to help the player orient himself would have gone a long way. Another issue worth mentioning is in the Dead Forest chapter. There's this puzzle where you're stuck behind this giant invisible wall, and the only way forward is by stepping over this enemy plant that will instantly kill you. The trick is to go pick up a rock and bait the plant into attacking that instead of you. This puzzle isn't particularly hard. The issue is that this puzzle is obtuse. The interaction between the plant and the rocks are never hinted at before, and in my playthrough, you'll only have to use this interaction once. So imagine my surprise after I walked the entire length of this area 3 times with this rock in my hands, looking for like a power supply monument that I need to turn on that will actually make me progress through the game. You know, the thing that's been an actual thing in the game only to find out that I just have to drop the rock on this plant so I can go forward. I was more annoyed than excited to solve this puzzle, and that's not the correct feeling you should be giving players after solving a puzzle. The final big issue, besides the controls and the lack of detail in the game, are the scene transitions. I mean, take a look at this. It happens in the Inferno chapter. You meet up with your lady friend on the ground. A cutscene shows you picking her up. She points in the direction you need to go, and so you follow. Cool, smooth transition. But then, after this gameplay stretch, all of a sudden the screen fades in and out and it shows the lady is walking again with no transition at all. Personally, I'm fine with this. I can allow my imagination to fill in the blanks. I don't need to see absolutely everything play out in front of me in order for it to make sense in my head. But this game really jumps around. Take, for example, the ending of the Badlands chapter. You get a view. Remember this because it's important. A view of the horizon. You are looking at the sunset, and then the lady jumps off the cliff for whatever reason. Once the scene is over, the Nightfall chapter starts. In a corridor, in total darkness. Like, I had to use a flashlight. I'm not kidding, it's that dark. Have you ever been outside after a sunset? It doesn't get anywhere near as dark this quickly. And like, where's the astronaut? How did I get here? Where am I going? I'm just moving aimlessly around here. Take this last example near the end. You solve a puzzle to make a bridge of light to get to the alien lady. When you're done, instead of running away, the alien lady uses it to get to the alien plant. And it fuses with it, and she saves the planet. It's all beautiful. Look at where you're at, man. This cutscene literally happens in front of this astronaut. He gets a front row seat to this. And then in the next chapter, Greenland's, have you start in a cave. How did I get here, Dave? How am I in this cave, Dave? The previous chapter, Ancients, had me dying of oxygen. I was dead from oxygen. There was a dead oxygen machine. It was all tragic. How am I alive, Dave? There's lots of things here that just don't add up. It's these three things I really feel, if they were addressed, could really elevate Lifeless Planet for the game that it is. An interesting story that's worth a playthrough with great atmosphere. Just to be clear, I know I talked my smack about this game, but I really did enjoy it. The controls I got used to, the details don't matter because I know everything is real, and the scene transitions aren't a deal breaker to me. Let's be real, Dave is just one man. The story was strong enough to get me to the end, and I honestly can't wait to see what kind of story Dave has created in his new project, Lifeless Moon. I just really hope Dave can take an honest look at Lifeless Planet and avoid some of these mistakes in his future titles. As always, this game is the start of a discussion. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree with anything in my analysis. I'd love to read them. Did you guys know that there was once a movie in the works at one point? No lie. It didn't get the funding that it asked, but the trailer still exists in the Kickstarter page. You can find the link in the description. You can also find the blog of Dave as he worked on his title in his hut in Alaska. Interesting stuff. I really like how he answered fans' questions in a timely manner. I'm not bitter. I swear. These are facts. That's it for now, and I'll see you guys next time.